Hi, everybody. My name is Kai Savas. Welcome to another Film.Music.Media conversation. I am so excited to welcome Dave Metzger. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Kai. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. So I'd love to, I love to just go back and maybe find your origin story. I love to know everyone's backgrounds, but before we do that, I love to just open with this question, and you can take it at face value. You can take it as a deep philosophical question, but I'm just curious, as a human being, as a storyteller, as a musician, as a composer, what does music mean to you?
Oh, wow. What a sweet question to start with. My gosh. Well, I think, you know, I can see it on a couple of different planes. One thing is just for me personally, it's an expression of my soul, my spirit, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Is how I look at it. It's a chance to, I've my entire life I've really had these feelings bottled up inside, or not bottled up, but stored inside,
yeah.
and I really music has been the best way for sure for me to express what those feelings are and what those thoughts are. And so yeah, that's at its root level for me. That's what it means and what it
Yeah,
is.
absolutely. So, yeah, I'm curious. So, when did you find music? I mean, rewinding back, was music a part of your childhood? Were you in a musical family? Did you find it later in life? I'm curious, what was kind of maybe that like first catalyst that got you from going to "Oh, I'm really interested in this," and then maybe when did it start to become like, oh, this is going to be my career path? I'm curious.
Right. Yeah. Well, I grew up in actually a very non-musical family, so non-musical that my father was tone deaf, and so he
Oh,
couldn't recognize any melodies. The only way he could recognize songs was if there were lyrics with them, and so
wow.
which is kind of wild, right? And
Yeah.
but he was a scientist, so he was a pretty smart guy. I mean, he was a smart guy, and I expect that's maybe the part I got from him. Well, I don't know. That's actually really presumptuous, isn't it? But but he really modeled a lot of searching and learning for me. Actually, is what
Sure.
he did. And my mom wasn't a musician at all, but the one thing she did is she loved having music on around the house. So as far back as I can remember, there was always something going on, in the background. And she listened to a wide variety of things. She listened to show tunes or show cast albums. So I remember listening to Camelot when I was a kid, and but I also remember soundtracks, and so it would be the soundtrack version of Sound of Music. I
Hmm.
remember West Side Story quite well, and but she also listened to things like Spike Jones, and so
Yeah.
just like really kind of wacky things too. And she'd mix in like Andy Williams and Perry Como. It was like this really weird kind of mix of music, and
Yeah.
so that was really fun and enjoyable. And then they tried to sign me up for piano lessons when I was like about 5 or 6 years old. I can't remember when, but I completely rebelled because I would
Yeah.
have rather been playing baseball, or doing
Exactly.
sports or whatever like this, and now I look back and it's like, how stupid was that, because I'm actually a really horrible piano player. My keyboard skills are really, really, really bad. And so, but so I had probably about a month of piano lessons. And then other than that, in grade school, it was just the typical American music programs. Back then it would be like about once a week. I think they took us into classes and we'd play recorders, and stuff like that, but never anything more than that. But
Wow.
then I got to seventh grade and I really wanted to take a woodshop class, but that class was full. And so the school administration in their in just trying to figure out what to do with these kids, right, put me in a choir class. And I remember talking with my parents, and I really did not want to do that class at all. But they said, oh, just try it out, you might enjoy it or whatever, might get something out of it. So I tried it, and the first couple of weeks after that I kind of realized that a lot of the music we were singing was written by the teacher, the choir director. And it turned out that that choir director was a woman named Joyce Eilers, and she was at that time one of the top composers of choral music for junior high, choirs in the United States, in the country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. And so
Yeah.
there was something that clicked there, though. Then when I saw that she was doing that, so I thought, we got to the first Christmas vacation time, and I thought, well, I'm going to see what I can do. And so I was just really interested in trying to write something down. So that I wrote a 4-part a cappella arrangement of Barbara Ann, which is like the old Jan and Dean Beach Boys song. I don't know if you
Yeah,
know that.
Barbara
Yeah,
Ann, Barbara
there you
Ann.
go.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you could be one of the singers on it for me. But but anyway, but I wrote it out. I couldn't play piano, so I didn't have any instrumental assist or anything. So I just went straight from my head onto paper.
Wow.
And I took it in then in January and showed it to her, and she saw that there was something that might be worth nurturing. And so she kind of took me under her wing at that point. And by the time I got to 8th grade, she was programming music that I was writing in concerts. And by the time I got to 9th grade, she was then programming for like the festivals and the stuff where, you know, you'd go around to different places and perform. So I was getting a lot of great feedback, and at
Yeah.
a very early age, honestly, with a very wonderful teacher. And after that, I switched to band in high school. The band program director was kind of a legendary director where I went to school, and his name was Harvey Brooks. And so then I started playing bass at that point and writing tons of jazz band charts and concert band pieces.
Oh, wow.
And another, sorry, this is a long story,
No,
so you
please
can
go
shut
ahead.
me
No,
down.
no, no, don't, I'm not shutting you down. No, please. I've had like hour and a half interviews with people, so it's fine. If you're not in a rush, I'm not in a rush.
Okay, it's cool as long as it's not too boring.
Not at all.
But then the other cool thing was then Miss Eilers, the choir director in 9th grade, then hooked me up with the local university. I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, and that school was Oregon State University, and she hooked me up with my first year of college music theory then in 9th grade. So I got exposed to a whole lot of things there. And one of the other cool things is that the director or the teacher of that class, the professor, took me kind of under his wing a little bit also, and then made a listening list of classical music that I should listen to. So starting probably with Beethoven, I think was the earliest thing, but going through, you know, Strauss, going through Stravinsky, going through
Yeah.
Ravel, going through Penderecki, you know, going through this entire thing from, you know, like 1820 or whatever through, you know, the current day at that point. And then he took me to the music library and showed me how to check out the score for these pieces on his list and the record. So I would just listen to the recordings and study the score as it was going by. And whenever I heard something that kind of tweaked my ear, I would stop. It was a 33, an LP, right? So I would take up the the tone arm and study the score and figure out what it was that was making those sounds. And that's essentially how I learned orchestration. Was I just and I also at that point was doing a ton of transcription. So the other thing I haven't mentioned yet is that I knew when I was 12 years old, that's when I started writing music. I started writing and I really enjoyed it. And then when I was 16, though, which was about the same time as taking the college theory, I saw in a theater, and this shows how old I am, I saw the first Star Wars movie. And I knew at that moment, that's exactly what I wanted to do, film music. And so it was like I was 16 years old, saw John Williams' music and saw how it worked with the picture, you know. And so at that point, that's when I knew it's what I wanted to do. And I started then transcribing a lot because you couldn't get the scores back then. So I would do takedowns, and I did takedowns of Star Wars cues. I did a lot of big band takedowns, so like Buddy Rich charts and did stupid things. I don't know, stupid. I did silly things like arrange adagio for strings for concert band, you know, when I was like probably 16 years old, you know. So like kind of like had a whole bunch of, it wasn't very good, honestly. It was really bad, but as you could imagine, but it was great, you know. Like I kind of had great teachers who supported me and great parents who supported me, even though they didn't understand any of it, but they were always, you know, behind me, you know, and wonderful in those kind of regards. So, you know, so that's kind of my earliest, you know, experiences, and then it kind of just grew from there, and yeah.
That's, I mean, yeah, then you fast forward and here we are. Like it's kind of crazy how just life takes like it. You kind of you think you're kind of like manifesting your own destiny, and it kind of just takes you by the hand, and you know you end up, you're like, how the hell did I get up here? You know,
it's really true.
Yeah, it's crazy because like I work at Cartoon Network Studios, and I started at Disney in home entertainment, and like I don't know anything about animation, and I'm just like, I went to film school in Maryland. I flew out to LA, and now I'm going to be a filmmaker, and then I'm like, no, I'm working in production systems. systems and managing,
Right.
helping with a producer. So yeah, but I love it. It's great.
Oh, amazing. That's wonderful. Yeah.
So I'm curious about like kind of your first jobs in the industry, like getting your kind of foot in the door, because I love that because you're still based in Oregon, right? Like you're
Yeah.
still so
Yep.
you stayed kind of in your home state. Did you ever move to LA and then decide to go back? Is that what the plan? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got through high school and it was like, I knew I wanted to do film music, but especially, that would have been 1978. And
Yeah.
so, when there wasn't really much going on in Oregon, and so I
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
knew, I knew that enough to know that I had to go to Southern California if I wanted, or that was the best shot if I wanted to get into
Sure.
film music. So my choir director had a connection at Long Beach State, Cal State University, Long Beach, and they had a very nascent film scoring program back then, which was very rare at that time.
Yeah.
And so she recommended I go there. So I went there, and then I had my Southern California experience for about 13 years, I guess it was. I was there for college and then moved back up to Oregon when I was 31, when my first son was born. And my wife, who was from Oregon, also said, what she said is, I'm going back to Oregon. I'm taking our kid and you can come if you want.
It's funny. We went through a similar thing where my wife and I we don't have kids, but during the pandemic, I had been out here. She's born and raised in like Redondo. So she's, in the South Bay area, but I moved from East Coast. And then during the pandemic, I was very fortunate where my work was like, you can be fully remote. That's fine. We'll approve you to be fully remote, like everyone kind of was. And we're like, yeah, let's leave LA. It's too expensive. It's too crazy. Let's get the hell out of here. But then like about 6 months in, we're just like, we miss it. And then we came back. So yeah, after 2 years back in my home state in Maryland, we're like, yeah, I don't miss the humidity. I mean, Oregon is beautiful though. I mean,
yeah. No, and for me, honestly, it's always been home. Even when we were in Southern California, I just never quite felt, organically engaged, or I don't know how you want to say it.
No, I understand that completely, where you don't feel like it's, for me, it's the opposite. LA, I don't know. I feel like LA fits me like a glove. That's why I feel comfortable here. But I understand people who some people are different. Like it doesn't, the style, the lifestyle, the kind of layout of the city. Yeah.
Yep. And just Oregon has always felt really like home for me. It always did. So,
well, that's amazing.
So when I was down in Southern California, though, so I did the college thing, and at that point I started writing for the occasional industrial film, and small little commercial things. So I sort of started doing that. Then spent a couple of years just needing to make money, so I was playing in a top 40 band in bars and stuff. So I did that, which was great because it really kind of honed my pop music skills, right? That I wouldn't have really had that exposure that I've has come in handy over my career. And then started writing for a jazz trumpet player, Maynard Ferguson. I don't know if you know who he is, but he was kind of the legendary trumpet player and had a big band stuff. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I wrote for the Ice Capades, for about 4 years, which was a great production experience, learning how to record things and do arrangements for more commercial kind of projects. And so, but then I got to I was like 30, and there was about a year where I had no work at all. I was completely unemployed. And that's kind of why my wife said, well, let's go back to Oregon. And I really couldn't argue with it, because I thought, well, I gave it a shot, but it's not going to happen, and it was like 2 weeks before we were moving, I got a call from a friend who had just been hired to be the music supervisor of The Tonight Show, right when Jay Leno was taking over. Johnny Carson had just wrapped up, and Jay Leno was taking over, and they didn't have any music for the new band. It was Branford Marsalis was the band leader of the new group. And so he asked me, he didn't know I was moving to Oregon, and so, well, you want to write some charts, for it? And I said, sure, and not telling him. And so I went in NBC after I had like 5 together, and Branford, I guess, liked what I had done. And then I thought, okay, I better tell him, I'm moving to Oregon. And he said, well, and this is 1991. He said, well, they got fax machines in Oregon, don't they? So which they did, but there was no internet, right?
Right. Yeah, there's no internet. So, but I mean, it must have been, you probably were in that torn space, because it was like you gave it your all for like this amount of time, and I think everyone's at that point where you're just like, oh God, I feel like a failure. I feel like I didn't achieve my goal, my dream, and then I'm about to pack up and go home. And then you always get this story, and then something happens, and it's like, why now? Like, how come that didn't happen like 5 years ago or something?
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
But the one thing I'll say, Kai, that for me, it was always about my family, right?
Yeah, of
That I
course.
knew that, especially because I didn't have a reason to stay down there, I knew that it was going to be way better for my family and to move back up. Our parents were still alive, so our kids got to know their grandparents and all that
Yeah,
stuff. So it
yeah,
was like all those the kind of the life things that really kind of drove that move. And I was accepting of the fact I might sell real estate, or I didn't know what I was going to do necessarily, but that was worth the trade-off, for
yeah.
me. And then the thing fell out of the sky, of the Tonight Show. And so the first 5 years we lived up there, I did like 250 compositions and arrangements from Oregon for the Tonight Show. And I would just do the charts and I'd fax them down, and they'd play them. And by the last little stretch, it was they were just sight reading them on the air. There was no time to even rehearse them. So that kind of made me get even more buttoned up, and I
Yeah.
knew I could make mistakes, right? So it sort of made me my charts probably, or my writing, more bulletproof than ever. And so that was the positive, I suppose. So
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know I mean, some of your early credits were like also like You Don't Know Jack, the video game, or
oh
and
yeah, I did
yeah,
a couple of video game things. Yeah,
video game
yeah,
thing, which now You Don't Know Jack is actually a pretty popular thing. It's like
yeah,
exploded. Now people use their phones and it can join,
yeah.
people can play across, during pandemic. I played it a lot, I know. But
Oh
the fact
wow.
that the fact that you did it back in 97 with the first or like iteration of it, or 98 or
Yeah,
whatever that was, that's
whatever it
amazing.
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when did I
But
guess
so,
oh yeah, sorry, go
oh, go
ahead.
ahead. No, after
I
you.
don't know. I don't know. I'm curious, but I'm just like, so after, yeah, I guess you were working on some early projects. So when did Mark, I guess, enter your life?
Yeah,
When did Mark
that's
Mancina?
exactly where we left
Yeah.
off. That's so I did that gig Tonight Show for like 5 years, and then me and Brantford had left and things changed in the show. So that gig disappeared, and so then I was back to thinking, okay, well, I'll sell real estate or something, and then
Yeah.
like it was like about two maybe months after that, I got a call from a great longtime buddy of mine in Southern California, Don Harper.
Yeah,
And
Don. Yeah.
yep. And so Don had just been brought in by Mark Mancina to arrange, not arrange, but orchestrate. It was Speed
Me too,
2.
right? Yeah.
So yeah. So not Speed, like
Right. Cruise
not
control, baby.
yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. The very slow moving boat, right? That
Yeah.
was Speed, yeah, right. But so Don was then needing some help, and so he was wondering. And Don had actually kept me going on other projects in Oregon too. He'd hired me for. Don did a lot of like theme parks and things like that. So I do
Yeah.
orchestrating and arranging for him on those jobs. So Don brought me in to work on Speed 2, and Mark and I kind of hit it off, and so then the film ended, and I thought, oh well, that was fun. I at least got to do one movie, and so
Right.
then, yeah, and then but about a month or two after that, then Mark called me up, and he'd been hired by Disney to produce the music for the Broadway version of The Lion King,
Right. Yeah.
and the person who'd been hired to orchestrate the show had just pulled out of the show. So Mark was needing an orchestrator to step into that job, and I thought, well, why not?
Why
I
not?
guess.
And boy, was
And
that a
lo and
great
behold,
decision.
yeah, it was
It's a bad
one of those.
decision for that last orchestrator. Probably is kicking himself or herself,
Yeah,
whatever. But
yeah. Oh, I don't know. I think he's done all right too. But it was definitely a pivotal kind of deal, because
yeah,
it obviously was a great show, and is still running, and the top selling
it's
grossing show
still
on Broadway
running.
even now, 26 years later,
Yeah,
and has had, I don't know, 40 50 companies around the world, and is still going in London, and I think 10 or 12 companies still going around. So anyway, and the biggest thing though is it honestly really solidified my relationship with Mark, because we were so much in the trenches and so deep in the trenches during that
yeah,
show, that I think he came to know that he could kind of rely on me. And I'm a pretty buttoned up guy. I don't bring a lot of drama to things.
yeah.
I like to just kind of I love to just dive in and do the work. And I look at it as an art and a craft, as opposed to like a business. And I look at
Absolutely.
as working with people in a collaborative thing, instead of trying to be dramatic about it all and stuff like that. So anyway, so Mark and I really got along. I mean, we're great friends still,
Yeah.
and so after that, then that led to, immediately after that was Tarzan. And so I orchestrated and arranged every second of the animated film Tarzan, and worked with Phil Collins on the songs,
Right.
and yeah, and I suppose kind of like jumping ahead more, that the other thing that was huge about Tarzan was that was where I first met Tom McDougall, who is the head of all music for Disney
Right.
films, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and
So
so
that really
that's
solidified your like relationship with Disney too, probably. Yeah.
yeah, it did, right. And again, the big thing is Tom was just starting out at Disney at that point, but he then, as he kind of moved up the ladder of Disney music,
Yeah.
he sort of brought me along, so um kind of I'll kind of come back to him in a minute if that's okay. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
then Mark and I, we just kind of kept so everything that Mark did for, I don't know, 20 years probably, I was involved in
Yeah.
pretty
You
close to
orchestrated
20.
pretty much all of his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, everything, and did a lot of additional music composition
That
along the
too.
way
Yeah.
too on a lot of those movies. And so that was great, because I got my um you know uh, um cinematic compositional chops, I guess, refined by doing that, and jumped over at some point in, I think it might have been about 2006 or 7, and started orchestrating then for other folks, and did a bunch of movies with John Powell,
Yeah.
and some Al Silvestri movies and stuff with Hans, and
Yeah.
um, golly, and
Henry
stuff.
Jackman. Like, yeah, you had
Yeah,
a nice, yeah.
right. Yep. And then Tom McDougall reappears in 2013, where he at that point then had been hired to be the head of music for Disney Animation. So he was now in a pretty significant role,
Right.
and there was a little film called Frozen,
Yeah.
that
It's a small,
that
small one they were doing. Yeah.
small little film, right? But he then was looking for somebody to be the arranger of the songs, and with Bobby and Kristen Lopez,
Yeah.
and he thought of me because we kept in touch through all those years, since Tarzan, and so he brought me in and hooked me up with Bobby and Kristen, and that then opened my life to a whole nother
Oh,
world
yeah.
of the song arranging thing, that then kind of became, I'd say, for like 10 years was kind of my main thing
Yeah,
that I was
I mean,
doing.
song arranging, and it probably ties back to your days working, with bands and stuff like to,
Yeah,
yeah. So you were,
it's really true.
yeah,
Kind of really worked out because I had all of this experience and exposure from 12 years old of writing choral music, of studying orchestration, and really in-depth studying orchestration, of
yeah,
playing in a pop band, so I knew pop elements, and writing pop horns and doing jazz charts, so I knew I'd been exposed to a lot of different things, by the time I got to Frozen. And Bobby and Kristen and I really hit it off, and still have a wonderful relationship, and they're great friends and wonderful people, and so that then led to along the way, then I guess Moana was in there, where again
yeah.
I did,
Moana when Mark came back, and you
yeah,
worked
did
with
it
him.
with Mark, and did every note in that film is tied to me with either orchestration or arranging, and did a lot of additional composition in that film, and all the songs with Lynn, and then jumped over to working with Alan Menken
Yeah,
on
I
a
just
couple of
did
films.
Disenchanted, and yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. And then Pasek and Paul did stuff with them. So it sort of, the song arranging thing, then became kind of a whole nother kind of thing.
yeah. It was,
And,
it,
and that kind of leads to finally getting my dream that I never thought was going to happen, which was composing my own film, where was the composer, and that was Wish. And
Wish.
that was Tom McDougall and Matt Walker, also in the Disney music department. So,
Yeah.
and I've talked a heck of a lot, and I'm sorry.
No, this is, I mean, it's like I had everything laid out. You just kind of hit all the bullet points,
I'm
but
sorry.
it's perfect. No, but it's so fascinating. And I do want to talk about, yeah, I think it's a perfect time to jump into Wish. So we'll jump into Wish now, and I have some other things I want to touch back on, but I think it was a perfect segue into that, because so Wish, I mean, because you took all of that, all of that journey through Disney and with Mark, and I mean, you along the way you were doing, a lot of those sequels that were fantastic too. I mean, the Tarzan 2, and Tarzan and Jane, and Brother Bear 2, and Don Harper's like Disney films, and
Right.
orchestrating some of that stuff, but
Yep.
composing your scores there, and I always loved those sequels too. I know like back then Disney didn't, kind of, those were like more like the direct to video market back then in the day.
Exactly.
but
Yep.
now now it's like, no, that doesn't exist anymore. So it's like Frozen 2
Right.
gets big, release. It would never be like a direct to video or
Right,
direct
exactly.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. And Frozen had its own, wonderful life. I mean, Frozen is its own world, right? And
Yeah,
so,
it's and I mean,
yeah,
I think that signified a really, I think if you have like a second Disney Renaissance, that probably started
yeah,
it,
totally agree. Yep.
and so with Wish, now you're doing songs as well, but the score as well. So it's you're really touching every facet of this film, and it's also celebrating Disney's 100th anniversary. So it's in really kind of celebrating Disney's legacy, and you've been such a huge part of that as well. So it must have been so, I mean, creatively rewarding to take on this project. So, but I'm curious. Let's jump into Wish. What was the starting point for the music? I mean, we know how
Yeah.
you kind of got hired, got part of the team. So what were the first conversations about music? And I guess, yeah, take me through, I guess, the whole process, because I'm curious. I'm sure songs come first because those are something that, and then score comes later, or is it all kind of I'm doing both at the same time? I'm curious how your brain can separate all of that and tackle the whole process. I'm curious what the first conversations were, and what did you
Yeah.
want to bring to it, and how did that kind of take off and the whole approach? Yeah.
Yeah. The well, if I can just even move back just a smidge, if you don't mind, it was to me a complete miracle to get hired for this film,
Really? Yeah.
because I had given up. I had done those sequels that you mentioned, but that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And then once I kind of turned that corner to being a song arranger in films, I kind of realized at that point any dream of being the composer on a film was gone, was never going to happen.
Wow.
And so 10 years ago I'd given up that dream of ever getting a chance to be a composer, or the composer, not the additional music or ghostwriter guy.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I got called about a year and a half ago out of the blue by Matt Walker, asking if I'd be interested in being considered for being the composer on this film, Wish. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, haha, Matt, this is a funny joke. I didn't say that, but I was thinking,
Yeah. Like,
because no way, why would they hire me? I had essentially no track record. It was very minimal as a composer, and I just sort of thought, well, this is, they'll maybe think about it, but I'm not going to get this job. Why would they hire me?
yeah.
So a couple months went by and I didn't hear from Matt again, and or anybody, and I thought, oh, it's gone. It was a nice little dream, but
Yeah.
then I eventually got to a point where I thought, oh, I'll just call Matt and see, is there any news or who got it or whatever, and he said, no, you're still in the hunt, and it'll be a couple of weeks, and then is what we're planning on, and then we're going to make a decision. The directors will make a decision, and I thought, oh, well, okay, but I still didn't believe it. But then Tom and Matt called me up. Then this would have been first week of September a year ago, so like maybe 12 months ago, and told me, that somehow I'd been hired to. They didn't say that, but that
Wow.
I'd been hired to be the composer, and I just screamed at the top of my lungs because I couldn't believe it. And again, this was a dream
That's
since I was
amazing.
12 years old. It was literally a 50-year dream.
Wow.
And to have it finally come to fruition was just like shocking, and then very emotional. I just when it finally sunk in that I'd finally kind of
Oh,
made it.
I can't. I mean, that makes me so happy though to have that, because that's such a beautiful. I mean, you must have been, once you got off the phone, you must have been like a swirl of emotions and just like,
Totally, you know it. Yeah, and I ran in to talk to my wife and tell her, and I was crying, and then she started crying. And it's
yeah,
like this. It was really, it sounds cliche or corny or whatever, but it really was the dream come true, right?
yeah,
And again, the thing that I thought was never going to happen. And
right,
so I suppose that's a lesson, right? That you don't ever know what really is going to happen. And
yeah.
so, yeah. But anyway, so now getting back to your questions. Sorry.
No, no,
So the
no. Absolutely no. Yeah, I don't ever feel sorry for talking. Like
yeah, yeah,
I'm soaking it all in right now. It's
yeah.
amazing, and you're such a great storyteller too. So
Oh, hopefully not too boring, but
musically and vocally, yeah.
oh. So then I guess it would have been early October was when my first, so about a month after I found out I was hired, was my first meeting. So then they I went down to Burbank and had the meeting with it was the whole story team,
Yeah.
And that was the first time then that I met Julie Michaels and Ben Rice. And so it was the directors, it was Jen Lee, it was Tom, it was Matt, it was this Allison Story, it was the producers, Juan Pablo and Peter, and it was like, the whole team, was
Yeah.
in there. And so at that point, the only song that had been written was This Wish. And but I believe it was even that first day was when then Julie and Ben brought in their next song, the second song that they'd written for the film to play for the team. And so I guess you could say then I was engaged in the project musically, not from the very, 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 very beginning, but from pretty close to the very beginning. So
Yeah.
and to your question that you'd ask, the songs definitely come first, and the songs are a very integral part of the story arc. So that's why they really get developed along with the storyline. And so the first 8 months or so that I was working on the film was all songs. It was only songs, and but
Was
it was a
score
process.
ever like, was score ever like, I'm curious, like as you're working and arranging, working with the songwriters and arranging them and kind of making these songs come to life, does that unknowingly, is it already influencing what the score is going to be, or do you like already, or as you're working on the songs, is score in your mind still, like how it's going to be kind of all connected and kind of work together?
Yeah, and you're right. It was always in the back of my mind that, oh my gosh, I got to think about it, because it was very clear one
Right.
of the things that they wanted, Disney and everybody was kind of looking for from me was to be able to bring continuity to the film musically.
Yeah.
And I think one thing, like sometimes when you see a movie that the songs are written and produced by different people than the score is, you really feel a jolt from, you got score, and then all of a sudden you have songs that live in a whole different world, and then
Yep.
you get back to score. So I think that was one of the things that I brought to the party, or at least that they were hoping I was going to bring to the party, was to be able to make this flow throughout the film. And so even though I wasn't working on themes yet, and I wasn't really, and this much of the film was still storyboarded. It wasn't really even beyond, into shoot. Well, I forgot the term now, but beyond storyboarding, the next
Like
next
visual development or
yeah,
previs or animatics
yeah,
and
there's a
stuff like.
word. Yeah, yeah. But you know what I'm talking about though. But
Yeah.
but so I couldn't write anything specifically to picture, but I was always aware that I was starting to think, well, I'm gonna need a theme for this character. I'm gonna need a theme for, Magnifico, and I'm gonna need themes for these different characters. And so I would start kind of, subconsciously thinking about it, but it really was almost entirely focused on songs. And mixed in there also, I took about a month where I was working on Once Upon a Studio, which was
Yeah, the short.
another,
Yeah.
yeah, the short, where I was the composer of that as well. And so I had about a month in there where I sort of stepped back from Wish and did that project. And but the songs, one of the things that kept being reiterated to me from the team was to try to bridge the gap from score to the songs.
Right.
And so also it was trying to knowing that the songs were going to be fairly modern songs, to make the score, even though the score was discussed as wanting to be a kind of a classic Disney sound, but it was also wanting to have modern elements as well. So I've got synthesizers going, I've got percussion that you wouldn't necessarily have in a 19, in Dumbo or something, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And a lot of guitar, a lot of acoustic guitar going on. But so whenever I would get close to the song, I would have to craft the introduction to the song, knowing that I would then have to backfill score to connect up with that introduction. So I was knowing as I was working on those introductions that I was going to have to connect somehow. So that was always in my mind,
Yeah.
when I was working on the song. So
Yeah. So I'm
yeah,
curious, like when they give you kind of, because when you're working on something, especially for Disney, and Disney, the name Disney's no longer, I mean, we think about Walt Disney as well, but that name is now kind of essentially, I guess I call it a brand, but a style and kind of a feeling. Like when you say Disney film, it kind of showers over the filmmakers that are also working on it, but also bringing themselves into it. And you could look through the Disney kind of legacy, and you see how the animation style has changed, and how the even song styles. And we talked about certain renaissances of the animation. So I'm curious, when you were given kind of these like, it needs to be a Disney sound, it needs to have this, it needs to feel modern. I'm curious, how do you put yourself into there? How does the Dave Metzger sound, and how do you feel that you can add your voice to it and make it unique, to not just make it a legacy kind of Disney film, but also a personal expression of yourself?
Yeah, yeah. And I just have to say, man, that's an amazing question. That's a great question. I hope I'm going to be able to address it properly, because that's a beautiful question.
Yeah,
And a lot of there was kind of this benefit that I had of doing Once Upon a Studio, because of that, I was also simultaneously going back and restudying the entire Disney canon, right? Musical canon, going
yeah,
back to Snow White. And I've been lucky. I've worked on 11 out of the 62 Disney feature animation films ever made. Going
right.
back to Snow White, I worked on, what is that, a fifth of them almost,
That's
20% of them,
that's
which is
insane.
kind of wild, right?
Yeah,
And so because of that, I kind of have I think, a connection to obviously the Tarzan forward Disney style and sound. But then I've also been a big studier, because of different films like Disenchanted and a lot of other projects I've done over my career. I've had the wonderful opportunity to have access to the printed scores of those original films. So I
yeah.
can go back and study Snow White. I can go back and study Pinocchio. I can go back and study Peter Pan, Cinderella, Jungle Book, and I love studying, again, coming back to my dad, right? I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
this endless horizon of music, that you can never learn it all and you can never know it all. So I cherish those moments to be able to like really kind of learn more. So I just would go back and study and see orchestrationally what were those tendencies, melodic line shape, what did they kind of do? And so, but a big part of which was, so that worked great in Once Upon a Studio, because we really did want to grab, like make it really feel like a vintage piece. But
yeah.
Wish, it was more of a, you want to harken back to it, but you had to have modern elements as well. But so one of the fun challenges was taking those lessons that I'd learned, and then modifying them, modernizing them, to have a little bit different shape. The melody, might go this way on one thing, but I would go maybe like, just take it a little different spin, and color wise as well, orchestrationally, try to allude to, to not allude, but really use the colors that were used then, but also then put on top, modern percussion, synthesizers, flamenco guitar, and stuff like that. So that was really, and that was very much desired by the directors. We
Yeah,
really
yeah.
talked about, Chris and Fawn and I, we really did talk about what the direction of the sound of the score was going to be. And so it was really a wonderful, it could, I mean, I suppose it was kind of probably right up my alley to be the composer on the score too, frankly, but
Yeah, I mean, you'd be, yeah, I can't imagine a better fit. I mean, someone who's worked within the whole legacy of a studio and has studied all of the music that's come before it. And I love how studious you are, and like you love to study and research and keep learning, because it's funny, I got a small chance to talk to Richard Sherman at an event one time. We had
oh
a
my
little sit
gosh, yeah,
down, I had maybe like 8 minutes with him, but and I said, how did like, and he just talked about being a sponge. Like he's like, my style, my brother's style, it's like you're just a sponge. You just take it in, and it filters through you, and then it comes out a little bit different. But it's like that's how humans communicate through art. It's like
yep.
you take in art, and it affects you emotionally, and then you put it back out. It's like it's
Absolutely. So you're
yeah.
so right about that, and he's so right about it. And I think that's one thing that sometimes people, I'm tangent go I'm heading on a tangent
Oh,
here. So,
that's it. That's what. So
but
these are conversations I love.
yeah,
We'll come back
yeah,
to it.
yeah.
Don't worry.
But I was just going to say, a lot of people will tell you, "Oh, I'm not creative, or I don't know, how to do it." But the reality is, we all have it in us. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of, you just said it perfectly, that it's absorbing and filtering and then re-putting it out there. So that's all. It's within all of us to do that. And it's just, I suppose, some of us maybe are, geared more towards it or more interested in it. I don't know what, but we're all creative. Everybody's
We're all, yeah,
creative. We
everyone's
all
creative. And I was just thinking about, I was doing a recording a panel either last night or the night before, which one it was, but we were talking, I was like, social media and phones and technology has changed. I mean, it's funny because I was like, when I went to film school, I was like the last class. I know, even though as much younger as I am as you, it's like I still feel old because I was literally the last class to use 16 mm film in my film
Oh my
school,
gosh.
and then I went right to mini DV tapes and digital like right
Right.
afterwards. Like,
Right.
so I was like, everything I learned, I was like, oh, okay, so I guess we're not using Aton and Arri films or Arri SR2s anymore and all that stuff. Like,
Right.
okay, I was a 35 mm projectionist, so I kind of worked on that.
Wow.
But now it's like, and when in film school, like you're the film guy. It's like, oh yeah, you make movies, right? Like, oh yeah, you're in. My friends were like in business degrees and doing all these other
Right.
things they did. But
Sure.
now it's like everyone is a storyteller. Everyone has a like a 4K 24p camera in their pocket.
Yeah.
They're creating short form reels and stuff. They're acting. Like I'm watching people like act out little skits and memes, and it's like people are acting and shooting and editing, and they don't. It's like everyone is a storyteller, and it's kind of cool. It's like everyone has
Yeah.
a platform now to express themselves, and
It's
it's
so
yeah.
true. And I always used to think too that when I was young, so I'm I'm not young really now, right? But when I was young, I there were no computers, right? Yet I still
Right.
had all the early writing I did, it was with a pencil on score pad, on paper and stuff. And that was really great because I really learned a lot by doing that I still use now, as far as layout and score layout and making it page turns right for the conductor, things like
Sure.
that, right? That you learned really well from that. But I'm also young enough, I guess it is, yeah, right, that I was 21 when I got my first computer, an Atari 1040 ST, right? And then shortly thereafter it was a Mac, whatever, it was an SE, I guess it was my first Mac.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I've been using computer technology since early 83 or whatever it was, 83, 84. And so that's a real deep part of me as well. But where I was sort of heading is back when you were younger, when I was younger, you had to somehow have had the training to know how
Yeah.
to write notes on a page and do it like that. And kind of one of the, technology isn't all good, right?
Sure.
It's
There's downfall. There's downsides to everything. Yeah.
yeah, it can be abused or used in ways that people don't maybe understand that then but the beauty of it is it's opened up this world to, just as we were talking about, to where anybody can write music now, anybody can sing music and record it, anybody can make a film, anybody can do digital art, that it's a lot more accessible now. And now there still is a gradation, I believe, to quality levels, but
Yeah.
really, but what it comes down to, right, though, is we all can express ourselves. I'd love to do more art, like visual art. That would be
Yeah.
something that I would really be interested in doing. And now I kind of feel like, oh, I got a shot at doing it. Like painting, then that would have been pretty sad. My painting skills would have been bad, but I kind of feel like, okay, there's some accessibility now that it could be kind of enjoyable and rewarding. So
Yeah, I
sorry,
mean,
way
no,
off there.
absolutely. No, but I agree with that completely because as I grew up through technology changes too, and you see everything changed to digital. But I think the downside digital is like, okay, when digital has to do everything for you, like what a human can express, that's when it becomes kind of hollow and empty. And that's why
Yes.
we're not going to go on the tangent of AI and what that could potentially
Yeah.
say, but like, but using technology as a tool to help you get maybe somewhere, but still just like as a tool rather than a crutch, And I think,
Exactly right. Yeah,
yeah,
that's you couldn't have said it better. It's using it as a tool rather than a crutch. And I can't really probably move my camera down, but I'm just surrounded by controllers here in front of me.
yeah.
You can't see them, and it's because it's a tool, so it enables me to work more efficiently. But I still work organically and in a way
But the
that
process is
isn't.
still the same. Yeah, the
Exactly
process is
right.
the
The
same.
process is still the same. It's just faster now because I've taken the time to program all these shortcuts and stuff
Yeah, I
to.
just recently we did the liners. Friend of mine and two friends of mine. We expanded the Rock. Hans Zimmer, Nick Lenny Smith, and Harry
Oh
Gregson
yeah.
Williams, and your buddy Don. Also
Yep.
worked on that.
Yep.
And I was talking to Harry for the liner notes, and he was like, Kai, that was like the time where NLEs like really kind of took off, like nonlinear editing systems,
Yep.
and he's like, we would send something back, and then we'd wake up the next morning, and then it was already in the cut, and we're like, what? Like like
Yep.
the mid to late 90s where it's like it changed, and like he's like, yeah, we would deliver the score, and like next week we're at the premiere and it's playing at the premiere, like on the boat going to the Alcatraz, and he's like, this
Right.
is
Exactly.
so those
That's
stories
great.
where you kind of the technology kind of changing and growing up during those times. I think we both, even though we're both from different like eras, it's like we both saw these significant
Absolutely.
technological changes. Yeah.
And right, it's going to keep going. It's
Yeah,
going
it'll
to keep going.
always, yeah.
Yeah. And so we're going
That's
to be talking, well, I don't know if we're going to be talking 20, 30 years from now. We'll see.
I hope so. I hope so.
I don't know, but it'll be interesting to reconnect and then talk about it then, with this conversation in mind and see where things are then. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, we've covered a lot of stuff though. We covered a wish, but I want to kind of maybe go back to maybe just your. I'm curious about your general approach, like your curiosity as a storyteller. So, it doesn't have to be. I know this question is could be applied and be completely different for a different film, depending on what the film is and what the project is. But I'm curious, what's your kind of general starting point? If you had like if you had like an open, like, you got your way, you're either on early enough where you could read the script, or you come in late, or if you prefer to wait for that like locked picture, you prefer to be on set if it's not animated, and kind of, or be in, look at concept art or anything like that. I'm curious, where do you go to kind of pull that first note out of you? What's your kind of, where do you gravitate towards for inspiration?
Right. And honestly, the way I look at it is the earlier that you can get involved somehow is the better. And be it a
Yeah.
script, or be it a rough cut, or be it, like you said, on set, or the earlier you can start to become engrossed, I think it's better. And what happens to me then is, I think it is a lot subconsciously, but you start thinking about it, right? And
Yeah.
in your dreams at night, you are thinking about these things. And I can't tell you how many times on Wish I would wake up in the middle of the night at the beginning of the process with a thematic idea.
Wow.
And I would get out of bed and I'd go old school, and I just learned to just have some paper,
Yeah, just
some
paper next to you.
score paper and a pencil, and I would just write it out, because I knew if I waited until the morning I'd forget it. And I would bet you I had probably about 5 or 6 themes that are major themes in the film that came that way, that were just
Wow.
middle of the night deals. And
Did,
so
were
and
you dreaming of anything that woke you up, or do you just wake up and not realize what woke you up?
what I think it was is and I might be wrong, but I believe what happened is I would go to bed intentionally thinking about this character, and
Mm.
what storyboards I'd seen on this film. They were storyboards at that point,
Yeah, yeah.
were leading me towards, and just in the general arc of the character of the whole film, what that character really is kind of about. And I would intentionally go to bed thinking about that and drift asleep. And then at some point down the road, wake up. So I don't know if it's because I don't know much about sleep studies. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
know. Like, were you in
I
like a
don't know.
RAM or whatever,
Yeah, I don't know if there are different layers. I know there are different layers, but I don't know what
Yeah.
layer I would have been in. But it maybe wasn't deep enough to where I was fully, asleep, but it was like at a subconscious level that I was still processing, my brain was. And I would just wake up. You get to an age and you start waking up anyway in the
Yeah,
middle of the
yeah.
night, right? Yeah.
I'm a light
I'll tell
sleeper
you what
anyway.
happens. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But so I would wake up, and lo and behold, there'd be these ideas. And again, it was kind of shocking. It's the first time that's happened to me. I've never worked like that before.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it was kind of like, if I am so lucky to have another film in my future, I would really do the same thing, because I really think that's it worked for me on this one, and I think it's a valuable, viable way to kind of come up with themes. And so then the next point is that really themes are the most important thing, at least in my book. Establishing your themes for your characters as early as you can, just saves so much time and heartache and panic.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
sure. So is that your first, like, I guess your first thing is to kind of sit down and just develop maybe like just kind of gear up kind of your repertoire of like of themes and motifs and stuff, so then you can start figuring out how you're going to expand them and do the variations and all that. So is that process for you just sitting at a piano? Do you like to noodle and listen to other things? Is it a very vulnerable, like maybe isolated process? Do you like to talk to people? I'm curious, like, what
Yeah,
your creative
yeah.
process is.
Yep, for me, it really is. I don't do, a lot of people will do like a 3 5 minute suite, right? Like a score
Right, right.
suite before they even start. And I don't really tend to do that, because I've kind of found that for me, by the time I then try to take that suite and sort of retrofit it into what the picture actually ends up being, for me, it doesn't quite work as well. I know it's great for a lot of people. I think
Yeah.
I would actually recommend people to try that at least. I just have kind of found for me it's not so good. So I tend to work on these individual themes, and like I was saying, they'd come to me. A lot of them came to me in the middle of the night. I would write them down without any instrument. I mean, I would just reach over and grab the paper and
Yeah.
turn on a little light and write it up, because I have that ability to go from my head to write out the melody or the lines on paper. So then I would wake up the next morning and look at the sheet, and most of them were actually, keepable. So then I would either go out to a piano and start just kind of playing around with different iterations of those themes. I'm a really bad piano player, like I said earlier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm an even worse guitar player, but but I would, though, if they were like guitar melodies, I really think that there's something to be said for writing on the instrument that you're going to be using. And so I would sometimes then I would just come out and fiddle around, on the guitar, and develop the melodies is what. And this is so then really the developmental portion of those themes.
Yeah.
And so they'd start out as just head to paper, and then I would develop them sitting in an
Wow.
instrument that I'm not very fluent in.
That was interesting because I know I've interviewed like Heitor Pereira, who's a
Yeah,
guitarist, and
great
he
guitarist.
rigged it up so that that's his method. He knows guitar, and he'll start getting his themes and kind of melodies through there versus a piano or a
Yep.
keyboard or anything like that. Or so yeah,
Yep.
if that's a kind of your, I guess your muse, and that's where you kind of want to go towards. I
Yep.
think any
Yep.
artist can figure a way to express themselves, get those first notes out or first ideas out.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And I think
yeah,
that's the real key, is get those first themes down. And then what would kind of happen is when I got to actually then putting it to picture, the themes to picture, I'd play the cue, and I would usually on a piano, and it's laughable how bad I am, but I would sort of watch the picture, and I would just sort of outline, what it felt like, right? And as much as I think I was looking for the tempo, of the
yeah.
cue. Yeah, and then and looking, and it helped lead me to where I would want to maybe change up, the cue, like on a cut or something that, so and then after that, then immediately after that, that's the first step of for me. Then I use a guide piano method. So I will write the cue on just a piano only, a synthesized piano, and that's where I figure out my tempos, and I line up the hits, but it's all piano only, so I'm not dealing with, when I was young, I thought, oh man, I'm an orchestrator or whatever. I'll write the whole orchestra, but then you waste so much time, like, messing around, moving, 40 tracks instead of just a single one, and so
Yeah, yeah.
so I figure out my roadmap with that guide piano, and then when that's set and I feel comfortable with that, then I get into writing the orchestra parts using
Yeah.
samples. Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, I'm curious, like, how do you, I get, especially we keep talking about Wish because I think animation allows you to get kind of big. You can be melodramatic. You can be, lush and kind of larger than you would in live action. So I'm curious, but I think you can still maybe do too much. So how do you know, like, where's the balance? Like, is it just all about instinct that you're feeling like, okay, I'm feeling I'm doing too much? You like to go big and then maybe draw it back and see like where that line is of being, oh, this is kind of too much saturation for the scene. Or I'm curious, how
Right.
do you rely on your director's feedback, or do you kind of feel it first and then present it, or just pitch like the biggest thing and let your feedback come in? I'm curious, like kind of how that
Yeah.
process is.
I'm just going to say right now, you must have a direct line to my brain, because that's like you like nailed everything right there in the question that I kind of went through on this film, where certainly, animation, like you said, especially a film like this that I think really supports a big, kind of epic classic Disney orchestral score, with
Yeah.
modern, right? I think that this film really supported that. But I'll also go back in time to where I'd said I'd been working on Once Upon a Studio, right?
Right.
Which was the classic, super busy cartoon music I mean, that's a bad word, but animated music to some degree, right? And so I kind of found myself, when I flipped back over to doing the score, I had 6 weeks to do the whole score, to compose the whole
Yeah.
score.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, which wasn't as much, but so fortunately I'd been, thinking about it all for the 8 months working on the song. So at least I wasn't starting, and I was very familiar with the film by the time I could start on the score.
Right.
But what I found is those first couple of cues that I was working on, I was overwriting, because I
Mm.
was writing more like the, 19, the Once Upon a Studio approach, and so I had to dial, and I recognized it as I was writing, but then fortunately, the directors and also the Tom and Matt were sort of saying, you don't have to work as hard, which was a good reminder that, oh yeah, that's right, I'm not in the short, where you had to really overwrite, so that was really good for me to be reminded of that, that I can step back and let the actors do the acting, because the fact is, I think that Ariana and Chris and the whole crew were great. Their voice work was, I thought, spectacular. I thought it was really well done. So
Yeah.
it was like a reminder of, okay, they're acting, let them do their job, and I'm
Right.
there to support the story and not to be the the real busy. So that was the first like couple of 3 weeks, I'd say, of me working on the score. And then as the clock was ticking and I was realizing, oh my gosh, I got an orchestra in like 3 or 4 weeks from now, sitting, that's going to be sitting there, and I got to get all the work so then at some point it sort of clicked, and I kind of felt like I got my sea legs under me, as it were. And it became at that point a very instinctual process, frankly, where I was just it just was flowing, and I had the themes together at that point. So it was becomes a matter of plugging in your themes to the scene and the vibe that you want to do in the scene. So it became much faster for me. I reached a point of where I felt like I had it under my hands, and it just kind of started. It didn't write itself, but it just became a very through thing. I was kind of looking through a cue early today that I did, and it's one of the big chase moments near the end of the film, and it's like a 2-minute just super action thing that cuts back and forth between it's Asha being chased by Magnifico. Then you cut to the teens. I hope I'm not spoiler. I don't think at this point I'm spoilering anything. I hope
no, you
not.
you can spoil. I can put a spoiler warning beforehand, but yeah, we can put a spoiler.
Great.
I know the movie's been out, so
yeah. I'm hoping that it's okay. So but it gets to the teens like trying to figure out how to help the wishes or whatever, and then you cut back to you're back to the chase, and then you're at another kind of thing. But it was a really complex 2 minutes, and I looked at it today, and I realized, and I went back to my files, and the way that I organize my files is when I get the video and dialogue loaded into my sequence and it's all ready to start writing, I save up another number. So I save that as like 1.00. And so the time that I did 1.00 was like 1:11 p.m. And then by the time I got down to 3.00, which was the final version of the cue, it was like I think it was like 7:15. So in 6 hours, I had written from scratch to this. What you hear is this 2-minute raging action cue in 6 hours and change. And I was sort of going, when I looked at it today, I was going, oh my gosh, that was kind of a lot of note. If you see the cue, it's called on the soundtrack, it's called a leap, a look, and a lesson. And so I wrote that whole thing in 6 hours, and change. Wow. And it's like, which blew me away when I looked back at it. The point being, it's not how wow, isn't that cool? The point being is it was so instinctual at that point that it was just flowing, and we all get there.
I think we all literally this came up in another conversation I was having with the composer. They're saying like he can't use a phrase that kind of writes itself. Like I feel like it's writing itself and then I was doing liner notes on another release with Hans and Gore Verbinski. I think we're doing either The Weatherman or The Ring, and I think Gore brought up that it was like the movie once the movie starts taking shape, it kind of becomes an entity and it kind of tells you what it needs. So kind of it's very much like. Yeah. So it's like it's like, I know what this needs. I know it's kind of speaking to me a little bit. And as an artist, like, okay, I'm going to give you what you need. I'm going to kind of give you the support it needs, like the narrative or the pacing, the editing or the character moment, kind of like, okay, I know where to kind of weave through. So
absolutely true. And that's so absolutely correct. And I'd sort of throw out there that even though this was my first film as the composer, I've worked on so many projects over 15 years, and that it does reach that point. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to do that, honestly. It wouldn't have come out like this, and it wouldn't have been as fast, and I don't think it would have been as true to the project or to the film,
Yeah.
but there's something about just like doing something a lot, you kind of can't help but get a little better at it, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm curious, like, once you're mentioning about like getting everything done ready for the recording session. So I'm curious, when you're in that room with the musicians and your music is essentially coming to life, are you able to at least pause and appreciate that moment, or or is your brain like so fixated on making sure everything is perfect that, or do you kind of take a moment to be like, oh, this is amazing? Like, I'm curious
Well,
what your emotional, I guess, journey was through the hearing your music come to life.
yeah. Well, it always, my favorite part of any film I've ever worked on is the recording session with the orchestra, because
Yeah,
I'm just so darn lucky to work with these musicians that sight reading anything, and it's like you can put the hardest thing in the world in front of them, and it's just like, oh no, no, no. And it's like
yeah,
perfect. It's so
yeah, yeah.
like for me, it's always the highlight of every project I've ever worked on is that recording session, or the orchestra dates especially. And so for me on this film, I was pretty exhausted, honestly, by the time I
I
got to
can't
the scoring
imagine.
sessions.
Yeah.
But I also have all along, I mean, I've always tried to in life, one of my things I always try to do is be so appreciative and thankful of every opportunity, right? And how fortunate I am and have been, and great parents, incredible wife, wonderful colleagues, opportunities that I could, just can't ever, you know, believe happened, that I've had the chance to do it. So, but I got to those orchestra sessions, and I sat down there, and the first day I sat at the board, and we were at Fox, scoring
Lumen
stage, and
stage, yeah.
I was sitting at that board, and I was going, "Holy cow! I actually really I've been at that board many times before, but
Yeah,
always
but
as a different
yeah,
role, and
as
to
a different
realize
role.
it was like, oh my gosh, I really kind of made it to the top of the mountain, and I'm so incredibly thankful, and it's amazing, and so it was very emotional. We were there for, I think we were there for 6 days, maybe 5 or 6 days for the
Wow.
orchestra, and we'd recorded. I'd had like groove percussion before, like a week before getting to the orchestra, just to be able to focus on that. And then George Jaring, I don't know if you know George, guitar player, played on 5 billion film scores,
Yeah.
through his amazing career. But so George was my guitarist, main guitarist. I had some other players too, but George did a lot. So I'd done a lot of work with George, just like this Zoom at his studio, and we'd do that kind of thing for while maybe every 2 weeks. I'd probably get George just to help my demos as much as anything, to have him play
Yeah.
on them instead of me playing on them.
Right.
But we got to the orchestra dates, and it was and I'm pretty focused, and I'm very detail oriented, and I've done it a lot, so I know that experience. I know what I need to do to get through it. But every once in a while I would just sort of go, man, this is amazing. And for me, the best part is going out into the room,
Yeah. Yeah.
with the musicians, because that is the ultimate, that it's one thing to be there behind the glass and hearing it come through the speakers, and you hear your music, and but it's a whole nother experience to be out in the room and hear it just coming at you as for when it's being sight read too for the first time, and it's just like, oh my gosh. And so I couldn't get out there too often, but I would especially I remember on the action, the big final confrontation cue. It's like about a 3.5 minute cue between Asha and Magnifico, and I really wanted to be out there because I had done some kind of things that
Yeah.
I knew were going to be kind of fun for me to hear back. I wanted to hear really viscerally, and so I made sure to go out there for that reading of that, and it was just like, oh my. And my wife was standing next to me, and Tom and Matt were here, and Chris and Fawn were there, and Peter and Juan Pablo, and Jen. I can't remember if Jen was there or not, but it was just like all of this whole family that we'd been together on this film for a solid year at that point,
Yeah.
and just kind of, and the musicians. I mean, I love them so much, and I've known many of them for 40 years. They've been a big part of my life, and so it was just kind of like I mean, it's hard. You can't describe it because unless you're going through it, but
Yeah.
just that there was a lot of love, I guess, is kind of what it felt like, and I felt so much support, and again reaching that dream that I never thought was going to happen, and so a very long description of what my my experience was.
No, it's a beautiful experience. I've been fortunate enough to be in the room a couple times. I've kind of befriended some composers that have invited me. Jeff
Uh-huh.
Zanelli invited me to his Pirates 5 sessions, and
Oh, wonderful.
I was there with Nick Lenny Smith conducting in the room and taking photos and videoing. And I'm good friends with Dom Lewis, and he invited me to
Yeah,
his
Tom's great. Yeah,
yeah,
love
Dom
Dom.
is yeah, I know you did all the songs for Spirited and he did the score. But yeah, but Dom like yeah, Dom also like I mean he praises you too. Like I go hang out at his studio and he's like, oh, Dave is the best, you know?
Oh,
And
that's so kind of him to say. Yeah, no, I
yeah.
think Dom is a tremendous talent, and
Oh yeah, but just being in the room, I remember I was just, he's like, yeah, come on down, like record, and just, I just, Hans invited me to his
yeah,
tour rehearsals, and I'm just there doing fly on the wall stuff and see if I can come up to
yeah.
something, just filming some stuff and watching it happen. And Dom is like, oh, we have like an hour left. Can I just, I want to record the whole suite. Can you just, we're gonna do it just for filming. And he was able
Oh
to come
man,
and he was able to come in the room and experience it, and I was able to cut together like a little music video, kind of, music video of like
yep,
his
yep.
suite. So it was I know that
So
moment of like
fantastic.
getting from other side of the glass to come in and see Dom in the room with his
Yep.
music was pretty cool.
It's amazing, and I'm so glad you've had those experiences. I only kind of wish that more people could have those experiences,
Yeah,
because it really is just something that until you're there and you hear it, you just can't even imagine how incredible it is.
I
So
know. That's why I
yeah,
try
I'm
to
so,
get in there
so
with my
glad.
camera. If I can, I get there with my camera. I know it doesn't do justice here, like watching on YouTube or anything, but like to feel it in the room. But just, and I think it's very rare to see like a full session
Yeah,
or full anything. So,
yeah,
but yeah,
absolutely. So
yeah.
cool. Oh, so happy for you.
Well, I'm happy for you. So I want to say, yeah, congratulations on Wish. I mean, it brings me so much joy to see you like really just like working your craft, and I've been following your career. I mean, since I was young, and always seeing your name pop up, and it was always exciting when either if you were orchestrating, I knew it was going to be an amazing sound. If you were writing, I knew it was going to be a great, fantastic score, just full of life. And you're such an amazing talent, Dave. So I want to thank you so much for all your time this evening.
Oh,
It was
absolutely my pleasure.
such
Yeah.
a joy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
and I really enjoyed having a chance to talk with you, and I wish you all the best. And I sure hope that we'll have a chance to stay in contact.